We're live. Hi, everyone. Wow, there's so many people here. Thanks for joining today. My name's Phaedra. We're going to be doing a workshop. There's mostly going to be a presentation on, but there's going to be a mix of a few other things. There'll be a chance for y'all to maybe check in with one another, and there'll be some time at the end for questions. My hope is that your takeaway from this class and this workshop is just maybe hopefully feeling a little more prepared to pursue accessing mental health care. And like this first slide says, this is predominantly in the United States. There is going to be information in here that might be relevant to folks outside of the US. A little bit about me. My name's Phaedra, or Faygirl. You can look me up here on Discord or here in vrchat. I'm white, I'm a trans woman, I'm autistic, I live here in the US, and I am a licensed mental health provider. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I work in a nonprofit providing mental health care and resources to the LGBTQIA community in my state. And so yeah, before we get started, you all look very attentive and very considerate. I really appreciate that. I'm just going to go over a couple ground quote-unquote rules just to keep in mind throughout the presentation. If you could mute your microphone to help reduce cross-chatter and just save your questions for the end. Number 2, this is a learning session. This is not going to be therapy. So just, when you're connecting with your peers and maybe asking questions at the end, just keep in mind the questions relevant to this presentation. And yeah, we're not here to talk about the deepest, most difficult things we've experienced in our life right here at this moment. If you are experiencing crisis, there are crisis numbers that are listed by Trans Academy at the entrance that you can go find. You're welcome to come and go as you need, and just try to be respectful of your co-participants and myself. So this is the workshop that we're going to go over today the structure for the workshop today. We're going to start with this resourcing, just getting to know each other a little bit, and a little bit of a brainstorm. The next section is going to be common barriers to therapy, and largely around cost issues. The third section, we're going to go over finding the right therapist and some additional resources there. And then at the end, we're going to talk about just ways to think about getting the most out of your therapy. And then at the very end, we'll have the Q&A. So yeah, we're just gonna spend a few minutes here doing some resourcing and connecting. We're gonna start with this will be just like a minute. I'm just going to invite maybe just noticing being in this space, in this virtual space. You could do some box breathing if you're familiar with that. That is just bringing awareness to your breathing, and that can be like breathing in for 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, holding for 4. You can do that just to regulate your breathing if you're feeling nervous. You can orient to the here and now, so just notice what it's like to be in this space. Notice the stars on the ceiling. Notice the trees over there in the distance. Maybe notice your co-participants. You could think of just 3 things that you're grateful for today. Maybe it's just that you're here. Maybe you're grateful for, maybe you got a decent night's sleep. Maybe you cooked something really good recently. Just think, these can be really simple things. And last, you could also grab a fidget toy or a blaha. Is that how you say that? I think that's how you say that. Okay, so yeah, I'll give you all a few minutes to talk, and I'll give you a little instruction. And so you're welcome to, I'm gonna give you a couple minutes, like 5 minutes, and you're welcome to turn to the person close to you, next to you, and introduce yourself. If you don't feel like talking, you don't have to. You could come up and grab they respond. You could just give a signal that you're not interested in talking. It could just be like an X or something like that. And yeah, so in your discussion with whoever you choose to talk to, or if you're doing it by yourself, I just want to invite you to think about what you're hoping to learn today, and what are some of the biggest barriers that you've experienced in improving your mental health. So I'll actually just give us like 3 minutes. And so y'all are welcome to talk. You can filter out a little bit if you need to, and I'll call you back to the space when we're ready to start again.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing very good. How are you?
Hi.
Hey, if everyone could start wrapping up their conversations.
Well, it was nice talking to you.
Yeah.
talking to you.
You too. Nice talking to
Well,
you.
see ya.
Cool. Yay. Thanks all for doing that. Okay, so we're just gonna start chugging along here. So our first section, we're gonna start talking about some common barriers to therapy people often experience. The first big barrier is often cost. Therapy can be expensive, so we're gonna explore some different options for navigating costs. We're gonna talk about insurance. We're gonna talk about um, paying out of pocket, and pro bono and sliding scale, and I'll kind of offer some ideas around this. So first, let's talk about insurance. Um, there are some, if you have insurance, there are some good advantages to using insurance. Generally speaking, healthcare costs can be substantially covered by your insurance. In the United States, the Affordable Care Act requires insurance providers to cover mental health. How much they cover and the ways in which they cover that can look very different from state to state, plan to plan. Generally speaking, though, that is, generally speaking, therapy is going to qualify as a covered cost. And of course, there are some disadvantages to using insurance. Part of it using insurance is that you need to have a diagnosis. And so depending on the diagnosis you receive, that will show up on your medical record. And folks have, depending on the challenges they're having, there could be something here that they don't want showing up on their health record. Another disadvantage, your ideal therapist might not be in network. There are lots of therapists that take insurance, and there are many therapists that don't take insurance at all. So that's something to consider. Another con could be that if you don't have great insurance, you might have high costs until you meet your deductible. And some of these terms I'll talk more about a little later. And then, of course, another con is denied claims. This can be a nightmare to navigate. I won't lie. As a healthcare provider that has to bill insurance and deal with a lot of insurance, it can be very messy and very confusing. And that is, of course, a downside of using insurance. Some ways to access insurance. If you do not have insurance through an employer, which I feel like this is becoming more and more common, that a lot of folks are working part-time gigs. They're working for themselves. And so, you might not get insurance through an employer. So just something to keep in mind. Every state has its own marketplace online. Usually you can just Google your state, whichever state you live in, the marketplace, and that usually should come up as like the top search. And some things to consider with your marketplaces, depending on the state you live in, you may qualify for subsidies. Of course, there's things that have happened in the news recently. Subsidies have been impacted by shitty legislation. But there are states where you might qualify, depending on how little, if you make very little, you might qualify for things like Medicaid, which can cover all of your health care, mental health care costs, physical health care. So if you earn very little, and depending on the state you're in, if you have a disability, you may also qualify for Medicaid. And generally speaking, mental health issues can also qualify as a disability. Things like PTSD, if you have an anxiety disorder, those things can qualify as a disability. So let's talk, we're just going to talk about some terms you might hear a lot when talking about insurance. I know that when I was growing up and first learning about insurance, and I would have these terms said to me, and they wouldn't make any sense. No one would give any explanation, and it can be really confusing. So this is hopefully going to help just demystify a little bit what some of these terms might mean if you hear them. So we'll start with the word premium. Your premium is just a fancy word for what you pay monthly out of pocket for your health insurance. And if you work for an employer, you might just pay like a small cost instead of the full premium cost. Coinsurance. If you hear this term, that just means a percentage of the contracted rate with the provider. So, for example, in order to get paneled with an insurance company as a therapist, I have to have a contract with them, and the contract dictates how much I can charge them. And so a coinsurance, so let's say I have $116 that I've established that I can charge the insurance for therapy sessions. If you have a 20% coinsurance, that just means that you'll pay 20% of 116 is $23. So that's an example of what So co-insurance, you'll just anticipate that you'll pay a percentage of whatever the overall healthcare cost is. Copay. So usually healthcare insurance companies are going to have you pay a co-insurance, or they're going to have you pay a copay. And a copay is just a set amount that you'll pay out of pocket, and that could be, and that'll depend on the services. So if it's therapy, if it's a doctor's visit with your primary care provider, your insurance might have set copay rates that they charge, or that you'll pay. Deductible. So if you hear the term deductible, all that term means is the amount that you pay out of pocket on your overall healthcare costs before other plan benefits kick in. And so usually how this shows up is you might have to pay 100% of your therapy costs out of pocket until your deductible's met. And then this is kind of a common scenario. And then once you hit your deductible, a co-insurance might kick in at that point. So once you've hit your deductible, it could be $1,000, it could be $2,000. Whenever you hit that deductible, some other benefits will kick in. And so it's good you can, usually if you log into your insurance portal, you should be able to find more information about what benefits will kick in when you hit your deductible. Out-of-pocket max. So usually this means the maximum amount of money that you spend in a single year for all of your healthcare costs. And this is, of course, healthcare that you've billed through insurance and have been approved, they haven't been denied, So usually this is a good thing to know, because if you plan on getting, let's say you plan on getting a gender affirming surgery, and your state covers gender affirming surgery through insurance, and you have to pay, a lot for that surgery, you're probably going to hit your maximum out of pocket that year, meaning it might be a good idea to get a lot of other healthcare done that year, because once you've hit that out of pocket max, you don't have to pay anything more for your healthcare. So yeah, something to keep in mind. If you plan on having a year with like a lot of expenses, try to get more stuff done. Next, we'll touch on in-network versus out-of-network. This just determines if your provider is paneled or contracted with your insurance company. And so, like the example I gave earlier, as a therapist, I have to basically negotiate a contract with the insurance in order for them to consider me in network with their network. And something to keep in mind, depending on how good your insurance is, your insurance may or may not cover out-of-network costs. So if you have really good health insurance, you might be able to get reimbursed for things like healthcare, for like therapy, even if your therapist isn't in network with the insurance. Okay, so that's, excuse me, getting very dry in the throat. So let's say that you, let's assume you don't have insurance. That's not always an issue necessarily. I mean, it is an issue in the general sense, but that isn't necessarily a complete barrier to getting therapy. In general, therapists are ethically required to provide affordable options. So most therapists are going to have what's called sliding scale or pro bono options. And then depending on the organization, that if a therapist works for a particular organization, if they support social justice and basically like providing access and support to folks of particular communities, they're usually going to have flexible payment options. It could be, just as an example, my organization, we have designated spots for folks that can pay as little as $1 a session, and we also have spots for folks if they can't afford anything at all. Other affordable options could be student therapists. So, similar to if you need dental work and you go to a student dentist, it's going to be more affordable than fully licensed folks. Um, you are you aren't going to get the same level and depth of expertise as someone that's been in the field for a long time, but you're going to get what I like to call 2-for-1 care. You're going to get this the support of your therapist, and they have to work with a supervisor. And so that supervisor is also going to give their perspective and their support to your therapist. And last, another another model that exists outside of the insurance system and outside the licensure system are peer support models. And these are so peer support groups. These are models for care that exist outside of the traditional healthcare system. And there's just as an example, there's a group in the state that I live in, a peer support organization that helps folks who are experiencing suicidality. And they want to provide a model for folks to get the support they need without the fear of working with a therapist who is a mandated reporter, and the fear of being having the police called on them or being hospitalized without their consent. So this is something to look up in your area to see if there is something like this. And of course, there's peer support groups online. In many ways, Trans Academy is very much like a peer support model too. So let's talk about, okay, so that's kind of like the big barriers related to money, related to cost. There might be other challenges that limit folks' access to therapy. So we're going to talk about your location, maybe being in a red state versus a blue state. We're going to talk about the frequency of therapy, and we're going to talk about confidentiality and suicidality, and how that can also, for many folks, feel like a barrier. So your location, generally speaking, therapy can happen in person, and it can also happen through telehealth. Telehealth is going to offer more flexibility. If you live in a rural area, it can be a good way to find queer and trans affirming therapists that might live in more metropolitan areas. This can also be good for if you don't have transportation, if you have barriers related to disabilities. And of course, some cons to doing telehealth is that it's going to be more removed. It's going to be less personal in some ways. And it's not always ideal if you can't ensure your privacy. If you live at home and let's say it's really hard to get like a secure, safe space. This can be a barrier, of course. I recommend, if I have folks that work through telehealth and they're having a hard time with that, you might want to work with your therapist to try to find, is there a friend's house you can go to for your sessions? Can you go to your local library? Do they have rooms that you can use there? So just some things to consider. Red states versus blue states are going to offer, there's going to be very different access to resources depending on the state that you live in as well. Generally speaking, most blue states have more robust healthcare systems and services, and as you all know, are going to cover gender affirming care. Therapy in general does not fall under the banner of it is not something that just because you're trans that you're not going to be able to have access to, even if they outlaw gender affirming care in your state. This link provides, this is a link to a policy tracker to see what the policies are for the state you live in and other states. Yeah, and generally speaking, you're probably going to experience more limited access to queer and trans affirming therapists in red states. And some red flags to look out for are things, conversion therapy, maybe some of you all have heard this term, masquerading as quote unquote gender therapy. This is something that's been happening in some red states. And this actually was something that happened with a lot of abortion access in red states. there were providers presenting themselves as abortion clinics, and they were actually clinics run by white ring Christians who were trying to talk women and folks who give birth out of getting an abortion, and they presented themselves as if they were an abortion clinic. So just, we'll talk more about this later, but like, this is a good idea to interview your therapist and ask them what their beliefs are and how they, how they view gender experience and stuff like that. Frequency of therapy. This can also be a little bit of a challenge with accessing therapy. There's a wide range of ways that therapy can happen. There is what we call outpatient therapy, which is that's primarily what I do. I see clients usually once a week, sometimes once a week to once every 2 weeks. Sometimes I might see a person twice a week if they're really having a hard time. You could pursue intensive outpatient. So this is going to look like a mixture of group and individual therapy. And usually this is going to be like 3 to 4 times a week. And if you're really, let's say that you are experiencing, we'll talk more about this in a second, but suicidality, but you aren't, you aren't in crisis, but you're really not doing well, and you're really needing more support, this could be a good option because it's really just more structured support. You're going to be spending a lot more time around others. You're going to be having others check in on you more. So that can be a good option. Partial hospitalization. So this is let's say you don't want to stay at the hospital, but you do need more support. You need quicker access to. You want to try to get on psychiatric meds, and the wait time to see a psychiatrist is you call up a psychiatrist and it's like 3 months or something. Partial hospitalization can be again a good in between from outpatient to fully being inpatient. And so this allows you to you can be at the hospital during the day, you can get medication support, you can get therapist support, and then you can go home in the evening. And then, of course, there is the dreaded inpatient hospitalization. For some people, this can be supportive if you're experiencing really acute, imminent, suicidality. If you're experiencing psychosis and this disrupts your ability to navigate your day-to-day life, your relationships, that's the hope here, right? Is that this is a container that can be helpful for stabilizing folks. This is generally going to be less therapeutic, and it's going to be more about helping you just stabilize. And of course, folks have had very, depending on the healthcare systems where you live, this can range from I've heard people having great experiences. I've heard people having very traumatic experiences. So, if this is something that you have had experience with, something I like to do with my clients is doing research and seeing what people are saying about these different organizations. And so if I have a client that really might need that support, I want to try to help them find an organization that has good values and doesn't do things that are harmful to their clients. So let's dig a little bit into this. A big barrier for folks is confidentiality, and in particular, fears around expressing suicidality. I think a lot of folks, a lot of young folks I've seen come in and feel that any disclosure of suicidality will lead to what they love to call a grippy sock vacation. I am much older than a lot of my clients. This is what they are calling it. Apparently, I think it's pretty funny. I have grippy socks. I after my surgeries, I got some grippy socks. They're fun. Having your rights taken away should be an outlier. This is not a norm. This is not, and in my opinion, when that has happened to folks, that is happening because of mandated reporters and police who are having knee-jerk reactions to hearing that someone is struggling. I think that this can be a helpful question to talk about when you're interviewing a potential therapist. You can ask them, how do you handle disclosures of suicidality or self harm? And I think in general, a skilled therapist is going to support you in exploring your thoughts and feelings. They're not going to jump to, oh, you had a suicidal thought. I need to call the cops right now. A good therapist is, that's the point of therapy, is it should be a space for you to talk about what you're struggling with. And so I think a good therapist, they're going to help you create a safety plan. And I think their goal in general is going to be to increase your resources and your support. And again, I think a good therapist, I've never had to do this. I work with a lot of suicidal people, and I've never had to call the cops on anyone. And I don't plan on having to do that ever. And I think I see that if we ever get to that point, I see that as a failure at some point, a failure around communication, a failure around maybe me paying attention to my client and listening to them. And it could be a failure of the institutions in their life. So again, I really, that's not something that I think therapists should be knee-jerk doing. And of course, this is complicated by your status as maybe an adult or a minor, and that different states have different laws around the rights of minors. So those of you that might be under 18, in regards to confidentiality and disclosure to parents, some states, so the state that I'm in, allows minors between the ages of 12 and 13 to 18 to consent to how much information they want shared with their parents. That might not be the case. That's probably not the case for a lot of states. So again, this is something to keep in mind. And I think that if you fall into this bracket, a peer support resources until you're of the age of 18, you might need to rely more on peer support resources. And that really, I think, I see that as a failure of our systems to make healthcare in spaces that are safe for folks to talk about what they're going through. Okay, so now we're going to talk about finding a therapist. So we've covered some barriers, some common barriers. Let's assume you're ready to find a therapist. Where do you even start? We're going to talk about some different ways to vet your therapist, and we're going to talk about different licenses, different quote unquote flavors of therapy, and I'm going to share some databases and resources for looking up therapists. And I call this kind of navigating the alphabet soup. There's a lot of different acronyms for different types of healthcare providers, and it can be very confusing. I'm going to give kind of 3 big buckets for you to think about them, putting them in. Okay, so the first bucket, and this is mostly in relation to mental health care. The first bucket is social work, and so you might see the acronyms LCSW, CSW. Social work is often work that is more integrated with the community. It's more community focused. It is folks who are master's to doctorate level training. They are going to focus, they often provide case management support. So if you need support with like accessing, getting on Medicaid, getting access to different resources, social workers are great at this. They're often going to have a more social justice focus to their work because of their view of interacting with systems and how systems impact people. Social workers cannot prescribe medication, and they can provide diagnosis except for medical diagnoses, such as ADHD and autism are considered medical diagnoses. So they won't be able to provide those diagnoses. Next, we're going to talk about counseling. So this is the bucket that I fall under. So you might see the term LPC, LPCC. If you see the word counselor in any of the titles, they probably fall under this bucket. Counselors can often be more goal-oriented and brief. I'm not necessarily goal-oriented and brief, but that is the profession in general can often have that kind of view. This can be master's to doctorate level training, and counseling lineage came from career and school counselors. So folks who worked that were working to support people in trying to get access to work. So if you're struggling with trying to figure out your career and trying to figure out your work options, a counselor could be a great person to talk to. And of course, they also, like social workers, they can't prescribe and they can diagnose with, again, the exception of ADHD and autism. And then we got our kind of quote unquote traditional psychologist or psychiatrist. I believe this is a picture of ye old Sigmund Freud, the OG psychoanalyst. This is what we call traditional psychotherapy. And so, these folks are going to have doctorate levels of training. They can prescribe medications. They can assess and diagnose for things like ADHD and autism. And generally speaking, they're going to be more expensive. And so if you are interested in getting an assessment and a diagnosis, this really sucks. A lot of insurance doesn't cover assessment for these things, which in my opinion is bullshit. I believe Medicaid, I don't know if this is true of all states, but if you are on Medicaid, they often cover assessment. So if you're on Medicaid and you feel like you could use an assessment, go for it, because it usually will be covered. Let's talk about the flavors of therapy. So most therapists use kind of a blend of all of these approaches. Understanding the flavors can help you with finding the right fit for you, depending on your social location, depending on your it could be race, disability, gender, sexuality, class, culture, etc. It could, depending on the right help with finding the right fit, depending on how you learn. So if you are a very goal-oriented person, if you are more exploratory and process-oriented, or if you want something that's really structured versus something that's more open and playful and unstructured. These flavors will kind of help you with understanding how they could fit with these different learning styles. And so, yeah, there are many, many more types of therapy here that I'm listing. These are going to be kind of broad stroke overviews. So this is the quote unquote traditional talk therapy. Terms you might hear are terms like psychodynamic, Gestalt, attachment theory, internal family systems. What this mode of therapy is good at is understanding long-term patterns and relationship issues. And these are also really good for understanding self and achieving quote unquote self-actualization. So these therapies are really good for kind of really doing a lot of really deep inner work. What can be challenging about these modalities is that they place a lot more emphasis on the relationship between you and the therapist. And for many folks, this can feel very scary and can provoke a lot of anxiety, as it focuses a lot on relationship dynamics. And also, in general, this can be much more open-ended and less structured. So if you don't like lack of structure, this type of therapy could be very difficult for you. Behavioral therapy. We got this guy training this dog. Terms you might hear with behavioral therapy are CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, REBT, ACT, EMDR. These are all behavioral therapies. They aim to change behavior by conditioning, essentially. So these therapies are good at conditioning, biofeedback, present moment awareness to create new habits. And what can be challenging for folks about these types of therapies is that they often address the symptoms more than the quote unquote root of the issue. And sometimes it can feel like you're being asked to think your way out of mental illness. Just think a happier thought, and then you'll be better. So this can rub people the wrong way sometimes. CBT, particularly, you might hear a lot of folks ragging on CBT. We'll talk about humanistic and multicultural therapy. Terms you might hear here are person-centered, liberation psychology, social justice, feminist therapy. These are kind of more. These were born out of kind of multicultural feminist movements in the late 1900s, and these movements are really good at looking at relationships with others and our community as the location of healing. So we don't heal in isolation. We actually are impacted deeply by our communities and by the systems that we're a part of. And these therapies are really good at holding the complexity of intersecting experiences, folks with different cultural experiences, etc. And what can be challenging about this mode is working with internalized oppression and shame, as I'm sure a lot of folks here can relate. Being part of the queer community, being trans, we often, I can speak for myself, I know I have often internalized the stories that I have heard told to me about what it means to be trans or queer. So, databases and resources. Therapists can and often will be able to provide referrals to other therapists. So if the therapist you really want to work with isn't available, ask them for a referral. They probably know a lot of other therapists like them that work in similar ways. Another resource could be your local Pride Center. Pride Centers generally they're not going to provide therapy, but they're often good hubs for getting connected to more queer affirming resources. And if you need help with applying for insurance or navigating systems, a lot of Pride Centers have caseworkers or folks that can help you with getting access. Through your insurance provider. So if you want to make sure that your insurance is in network with someone, most insurances keep a database of their healthcare providers that are in network with them. This isn't always 100% up to date, so don't take that as kind of like what's the term I'm trying to think of? 100% accurate. These databases aren't always completely accurate. So, and of course, databases that I often like to refer folks to are things like Psychology Today, which you can filter and search by identities, by how they practice therapy, by their location, by cost, by insurance. And so usually I've found a lot of folks through here. Inclusivetherapist.com, nqttcn.com. This is the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network. So if you're looking to work with someone who is part of the QT BIPOC community, that could be a good link. And referrals. Again, referrals are often a great way to find folks. So just ask other people in your area who they see. Ask if you find a therapist that you seem like you could work with, ask them for referrals. Just keep in my experience, the best way to get connected to resources, to get connected to people, is to ask people about other people. Just ask, and usually that leads to that can lead to a lot more possibilities and options. Okay, so let's go over real quick. And I'm going to try to get through this section a little quickly so we have time for the Q&A. Getting the most out of your therapy. This is these man buns. This is Sisyphus. He's pushing a boulder up a hill. If you're familiar with the Greek story. And he's trying, he's got his struggle. He's got his challenge. He's got this boulder that's kind of pushing him down. Why you are coming to therapy, why coming to therapy with specific goals can be helpful, is that it helps create motivation. It can help with making good use of your time, and it can also help with finding a good match for a therapist. And so some examples, I'm going to give some example goals you could come up with. If you are experiencing traumatic flashbacks, a goal could be to feel safer in your body and your relationships. If you're experiencing executive functioning challenges, very common. I have a lot of clients with ADHD. It could be gaining helpful skills in resourcing. It could be addressing feelings of hopelessness and isolation. It could be building relationships, community, and a sense of purpose and meaning. And if you, let's say you experience low self-worth and dysphoria and dysmorphia, a goal could be working with your inner critic, working with shame, and a goal could be improving your self-esteem. So finding the right fit. Finding a therapist that shares all of your identities is probably going to be unlikely. So it's maybe something to consider is just what aspects of identity are most important to you. What do you most want to work on? It could be your ethnicity, your culture, your race. It could be gender, disability, neurodiversity. It could be your age. It could be hobbies and interests. And I think it's good to interview multiple therapists. Think of this as like dating. You know, you're going to get a vibe or a gut check to see how you fit. Do you feel like you could talk to this person? Do you feel like you could eventually trust this person? Bring up your concerns to see how they respond, and you could talk about them in an abstract way. You could be like, you know, I have a friend who experiences suicidality. How would you work with my friend? You know, if it feels too much to talk about it directly for you, you know, just like you can come up with creative ways of putting your feelers out and seeing how they feel about things. And, you know, just an important question to ask yourself, are they the right person for the job? You're hiring them. You are not obligated to work with anyone. And if you feel like you've been working with someone and it's not feeling like it's going anywhere, hell, bring it up with them. Tell them how you're feeling. And, you know, my opinion, when I've had clients tell me this, I'm like, thank you so much for letting me know. Let's try to figure, I might not be the right person for you. And that's fine. But also maybe there's something I'm missing here. And so you know, I like to say to clients, I'm happy to try something new. And also I'm very happy to help you find the right fit. I want this to work for you. Whew, okay.